The I was imagining this album, Songs of a Lost World, was going to be very much everything was going to be relentlessly downbeat. That was sort of my idea for the album, and a few people who I trust listened to it and said, you know, that it's the songs individually are really, really good, but it's too much. We can't, you know, you can't expect people to listen to this much doom and gloom. It just doesn't work. You know, you need something else in there. So so a couple of the songs which I really do love were kind of like knocked off, and a couple of songs brought in which I didn't think would work at all. And I actually started streamlined the whole thing. You know, it was originally 13 songs, and now it's like 8, and it's a much better record for it because it has a bit of light and dark, and it's I mean, most people that have heard it up to this point want to hear it again. That's the first time in a long time that anyone said that about a Cure album, because they've been too long. You know, it's like our shows. It's like it took me to doing a 4-hour plus show to suddenly realise that we were probably playing for too long. It just takes me a little bit longer to realise than the people around me.
What was the track or was there a track that you finished that kind of unlocked the record, that kind of like when you had it down, you're like, okay, now I feel like I know maybe the identity of the whole record because this song has kind of pointed the way, unlocked the door?
Yeah, as I said earlier, the opening and closing songs, those two songs, they're always key in every Cure album. They're always the key to the album. And I remember I discovered, or actually I rediscovered, a poem by Ernest Dowson, an English poet, who it's called Dregs. And I've got a book, and I jot down, you know, over the years things that, like, you know, I think that's interesting. Like, you know, it's not, some of it's just like, you know, couplets, some of it's like rhyme, some of it's words that I don't look this word up. You know, it's just a general sort of. It's not a journal. It's a lot of it's gobbledygook. You know, it's like it travels with me, and there's more than one book actually, to be honest. And you know, I'm outside in the dark actually, like, and you know, scribbling in it. Most of it's illegible, to be honest, and a lot of it's just junk. But occasionally I'll turn a page and there'll be something and I think, oh, that's great. And I'd actually transcribed this poem, I don't know when, and I was struggling to find the right imagery for the opening song, for Alone. And I had some of the stuff in it, and I kind of knew what I wanted, and this poem, the opening line, I thought, that's it. You know, so I didn't nick it. I was inspired by it. I mean, it just the idea of because it was in the back of my mind. I was thinking, I've read this somewhere, that every song we sing, like we're alone, however much we, you know, ultimately we're alone. And but however I was writing it, it wasn't poetic, and suddenly I discovered this. I thought, that's it. That's what's been bugging me. So that was a moment when I suddenly, because I knew what the song was supposed to be about. And End Song, I wrote it just in one night, and it was actually in 2019, because the album, the sessions were called Live from the Moon. It was actually called Live from the Moon. Transmission 1 was the first session, Transmission 2 was the second session. It was because it was the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, the lunar landings. And I was actually outside, and I was remembering back to, you know, I think I was 10 years old, and I was in the back garden with my dad, and I was like, I remembered, you know, the feeling of like, really, you know, I didn't believe it. I didn't actually believe there was a man on the moon, but and I thought, here I am, still stargazing, you know, and I'm still kind of like, I do believe man walked on the moon. I'm not so. I don't think it was done in the studio next door. But just the idea of how the world seemed to stall at that moment in a strange way. You know, I kind of grew up like in the glorious 30 years from like the end of the Second World War. Obviously, I wasn't born until 59, but the world that I was born into was getting incrementally better every year. It just seemed that the world was on an upward trajectory, and the moon landing was part of that. And around that time, I turned 16 in 75, and it seemed like the world sort of like stalled, and then it's been travelling downhill ever since. And I mean, that's the core, that's the beating heart of the album, of the Songs of a Lost World. That is the Lost World. And I realised when I wrote that, you know, I just wrote that in one go outside, but like, this is how I feel about, you know, the young me. Where did it go, sort of thing. And it's at that moment, I thought, well, that's the end song. I've got the end song. I've got the opening song. You know, so it was. I think that those two moments put together, and both happened in 2019. I sort of knew that, you know, which is probably why I started blathering about the album to people. We've got a new album. We've got a new album. When in fact we had like 26 pieces of music and 2 songs. So I was being slightly disingenuous, but I did it in good faith. I thought it might motivate me to kind of, you know, once it's like when you make a promise in public, it becomes more difficult to break it. And I thought, well, you know, as it turns out, I've eventually, you know, finally got there, but it's just taken a lot longer for various reasons.